There's a voice in your head right now. It's been there so long you probably don't even notice it anymore. It narrates everything what you're doing, what you should be doing, what you did wrong yesterday, what might go wrong tomorrow. It comments on this very moment, analyzing whether you're paying attention properly, whether this is worth your time, whether you're understanding it correctly. The voice never stops. Even when you're trying to relax, it's there, planning, worrying, replaying conversations, imagining scenarios that will never happen. And the strange thing is, you've come to believe that this voice is you. That the constant stream of mental chatter is what it means to be conscious, to be alive, to be a person. But what if that's not true? What if this voice, this endless internal monologue, isn't actually helping you at all? What if it's the very thing that's keeping you trapped in a state of constant mental exhaustion? Most people spend their entire lives listening to this voice without ever questioning it. They assume that more thinking will solve the problem of too much thinking. When they're anxious, they think about why they're anxious. When they're sad, they analyze the sadness. When they can't sleep, they think about why they can't sleep, which of course makes sleep impossible. The mind has become a tool that runs constantly, even when there's nothing to do, nowhere to go, no problem to solve. It's like leaving a car engine running all night in the driveway burning fuel, creating noise, wearing itself down, accomplishing nothing. And the cost of this constant mental activity is enormous. It drains your energy. It separates you from the present moment. It turns every experience into something to be narrated, judged, compared, understood, rather than simply lived. You're not actually here anymore. You're in your head, thinking about being here, which is not the same thing at all. There's a difference between thinking that serves you and thinking that enslaves you. Useful thinking solves problems. It plans, creates, figures things out. It happens when it's needed and then naturally subsides. But most of what happens in your mind isn't useful thinking, it's compulsive thinking. It's the same thoughts looping over and over. It's worry that changes nothing. It's replaying the past as if reviewing it enough times will somehow alter what happened. It's imagining future disasters and believing you're preparing for them when really you're just rehearsing suffering that hasn't happened and probably never will. This kind of thinking doesn't solve anything. It doesn't make you safer or smarter or more prepared. It just creates a constant state of low-level anxiety, a background hum of mental noise that you've learned to live with because you don't know any other way to be. Alan Watts spent much of his life exploring this exact problem. He wasn't interested in giving people techniques to think better or manage their thoughts more efficiently. He was pointing to something far more fundamental, the possibility of recognizing what exists before thought, beneath thought, beyond thought. Watts understood that the thinking mind, for all its brilliance, has a fatal flaw. It can't step outside itself. It can't think its way to silence because thinking is the noise. You can't use the mind to escape the mind any more than you can use fire to put out fire. So Watts didn't offer mental strategies. He offered a different kind of seeing, a recognition of something that's always been here but gets completely overlooked because we're too busy thinking to notice it. He called it awareness. Others call it presence, consciousness, the witness. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that it's what you actually are underneath all the mental activity. And once you recognize it, everything changes. Most people are terrified of silence. Not the silence of no sound, but the silence of no thought. They fill every gap with noise music, podcasts, scrolling, planning, worrying, anything to avoid the emptiness they imagine silence to be. But this fear is based on a complete misunderstanding. Silence isn't empty. It's not a void or an absence or a nothingness that will swallow you if you stop thinking. Silence is the space in which everything appears. It's the background against which all sound exists. Without silence, there would be no music, because music is the relationship between sound and the space around it. Without silence, there would be no speech, because words only have meaning because of the pauses between them. Silence isn't the opposite of sound, it's what makes sound possible. And the same is true for your mind. The silence of awareness isn't the absence of thoughts. It's the vast open space in which thoughts arise and dissolve, come and go, appear and disappear. You've been so focused on the thoughts themselves, on the content of your thinking, that you've completely missed the space in which all of it is happening. Right now, there's a gap. It's tiny, almost imperceptible, but it's there. It's the space between this sentence and the next one. The pause before a thought forms. The stillness between one breath ending and another beginning. Most people never notice these gaps because they're moving too fast, thinking too much, always rushing toward the next thing. But the gaps are where silence lives. Not as something you have to create or achieve, but as something that's already here, woven into every moment. When you start paying attention to these spaces, something shifts. You realize that silence isn't rare or difficult to find. It's everywhere. It's in the pause between heartbeats. It's in the moment before you speak. It's in the split second before a thought arises, when there's just awareness, just presence, just the simple fact of being here without any story about it. And in those gaps, something becomes clear. The silence is more real than the noise. The awareness is more fundamental than the thoughts. You've been so identified with the content of your mind that you forgot about the container, the space, the consciousness in which all of it appears. Here's something most people never consider. Right now, you're aware. You're aware of these words, aware of your breathing, aware of the feeling of your body, aware of the thoughts commenting on all of this. But here's the strange part: you're also aware that you're aware. There's a consciousness that knows itself without needing to think about it. It's not like you have to remind yourself that you're conscious. You just are, and you know you are, directly, immediately, without any mental process required. This is what Watts was pointing to when he talked about awareness watching itself. It's not a thought. It's not an idea about consciousness. It's the direct recognition that consciousness is self-aware, that it doesn't need an object to be conscious of, that it can simply rest in its own knowing of itself. And this might sound abstract or philosophical, but it's actually the most obvious thing in the world once you notice it. You are aware, and you're aware that you're aware, and there's no distance between those two things. The knower and the knowing are the same. Awareness doesn't happen to you, you are awareness. But who is doing all this thinking? If you pay close attention, you'll notice something strange. Thoughts just appear. You don't choose them. You don't sit there and decide what to think next. A thought arises, seemingly out of nowhere, and then you claim it as yours. You say, "I'm thinking about dinner," or "I'm worried about tomorrow," as if there's a you who's generating these thoughts deliberately. But is there? Try it right now. Try to decide what your next thought will be 5 seconds from now. You can't, can you? Because you don't know what the next thought will be until it arrives. Thoughts arise spontaneously, mysteriously, from some source you can't control or predict. So if you're not creating the thoughts, if they're just appearing on their own, then who is the thinker? Where is this person who's supposedly in charge of all this mental activity? The more you look for the thinker, the more it dissolves. There's thinking happening, yes. But there's no separate entity doing the thinking. There's just the flow of mental activity appearing in awareness, and the mistaken belief that there's a you behind it all, pulling the strings, making it happen. For years, maybe your whole life, you've believed you are the thinker. You've identified completely with the voice in your head. When it's anxious, you're anxious. When it's critical, you feel bad about yourself. When it won't shut up, you feel trapped. But now there's a crack in that identity. Now you're starting to see that thoughts are just events, phenomena, things that happen within your awareness, not who you are. And if you're not the thinker, then who are you? Many people, when they first glimpse this, become the witness. They step back from their thoughts and watch them, creating a new identity as the observer. This feels like progress, and it is. It's much better to watch your thoughts than to be completely lost in them. But Watts would say even this is not the end. Because who is watching the watcher? If you're observing your thoughts, there's still awareness of that observing. So are you the observer, or are you the awareness that knows the observer? And if you're aware of being aware, who's aware of that? The mind tries to create layers, to maintain some sense of separation, some subject observing an object. But the truth is simpler and stranger than that. There's just awareness, being aware of itself, appearing as everything thoughts, observations, the sense of being a witness, the sense of questioning all of this. It's not divided. It's seamless, whole, one thing appearing as many. So what happens when there's no thinker? Does everything fall apart? Do you become a vegetable, unable to function? This is what people fear, and it's completely backward. Life doesn't stop when you recognize you're not the thinker. In fact, it becomes much simpler. Actions still happen. Words still come. Decisions still get made. But now they flow naturally, without the constant internal argument, without the voice second-guessing everything, without the exhausting sense that there's a you who has to manage it all perfectly. Watch a child at play, completely absorbed, not thinking about playing, but just playing. That's what life looks like without the constant overlay of self-consciousness. It's lighter, more spontaneous, more intelligent in a way that has nothing to do with cleverness or analysis. The body knows how to move. The mind knows how to respond. Intelligence operates perfectly well without a separate controller claiming credit for it. You've been carrying the weight of being a thinker, a doer, a person who has to figure everything out, when really life has been living itself through you all along. The heart beats without your supervision. The breath breathes itself, and thought thinks itself. You're not doing any of it. It's all just happening, naturally, effortlessly, and the only suffering comes from the illusion that there's a separate you who should be in control. Now, this doesn't mean thinking is bad or useless. There's a kind of thinking that serves life beautifully. When you're creating something, solving a puzzle, planning a trip, learning a skill, this is thinking that has a purpose, that arises when needed, and then dissolves when it's done. The problem is never thinking itself. The problem is compulsive thinking, the background static that runs constantly without purpose, generating suffering out of nothing. And here's the beautiful thing: when you live from awareness rather than from identification with thought, the useful thinking still happens. Maybe even more efficiently, because it's not competing with all the useless mental noise. But the compulsive thinking, the worry and rumination and self-criticism, begins to fall away. Not because you're suppressing it or fighting it, but because you're no longer feeding it with belief. You're no longer identifying with it. It arises, and you notice it's just a thought, just a pattern, just noise, and it has no more power over you than a cloud passing through the sky has power over the sky. There's something else Watts understood that most people miss. The best ideas, the deepest insights, the most creative solutions, they don't come from thinking hard. They come from not thinking. Every artist knows this. Every scientist knows this. The breakthrough doesn't happen at the desk, straining and forcing. It happens in the shower, on a walk, in that moment of letting go when the mind finally stops trying to figure it out. There's an intelligence that's deeper than thought, and it only emerges when the surface mind settles into stillness. Think of a pond. When it's churning with activity, the water is murky, disturbed, opaque. You can't see the bottom. But when it settles, when the movement stops, the water becomes clear. You can see all the way down. Insight is like that. It doesn't come from stirring up more thoughts. It comes from allowing the mind to settle, to be still, so clarity can emerge naturally from the silence. This is why people have revelations in meditation, or just before sleep, or in moments of deep rest. Not because they achieved something, but because they finally stopped trying. They got out of their own way, and the intelligence that's always been there, waiting beneath the noise, could finally be felt. So what does life look like when you're living from awareness instead of from constant thought? It's hard to describe because it's so simple. You're here, fully. Not thinking about being here, not narrating the experience, not comparing it to other experiences, or judging whether it's good enough. Just here, present, awake. Things still happen. Some are pleasant, some aren't. But there's no longer this constant commentary about it all. No voice saying, this should be different. I should be different. This isn't enough. Life becomes direct again, the way it was when you were a child, before you learned to live in your head. Colors are brighter because you're actually seeing them instead of thinking about them. Conversations are richer because you're actually listening instead of planning what to say next. Even difficult moments become more bearable because you're not adding the extra layer of suffering that comes from resisting what is. The pain might be there, but the struggle with the pain dissolves. And in that dissolution, there's a kind of peace that has nothing to do with circumstances being perfect. It's the peace of no longer fighting with reality, no longer arguing with what is, no longer exhausting yourself trying to control what was never in your control anyway. People always want to know, how do I do this? How do I become aware? How do I stop overthinking? And the answer is frustrating because there's nothing to do. Awareness isn't something you achieve. It's what you already are. You can't become what you've always been. You can only recognize it. And that recognition doesn't require effort or practice or years of meditation, though those things might help you notice what's here. The recognition is simple. Just pause. Just for a moment, stop and notice there's awareness here. Right now, something is aware of these words, aware of your breathing, aware of the feeling in your body, aware of the thoughts commenting on all this. That awareness isn't something you created. It's not something you have to maintain. It's already here, already present, already aware. All you're doing is noticing it. And every time you notice, you're recognizing what you are. Not the thoughts, not the story, not the voice in your head. You're the awareness in which all of that appears. That's it. That's the whole thing. Simple, immediate, obvious once you see it, and yet somehow overlooked for an entire lifetime because you were too busy thinking to notice what's prior to thought. And here's what no one tells you you're going to forget. Probably many times. You'll get lost in thought again. You'll identify with the voice again. You'll believe the stories again. And that's completely fine. This isn't about achieving a permanent state of enlightenment where you never think again. This is about recognizing what's true, again and again, each time you remember. And here's the secret: the moment you realize you've been lost in thought, you're already back. That recognition, that awareness of, oh, I was thinking, is itself the awakening. It's not a problem that you forgot. Forgetting and remembering is the rhythm. You don't need to feel bad about it. You don't need to make it a project or a practice or something you're succeeding or failing at. Just notice. Just recognize. Just return to the awareness that's always been here, waiting for you to remember what you are. And each time you return, it gets easier. Not because you're getting better at it, but because you're seeing more clearly that there's nowhere to go, nothing to achieve, no state to maintain. There's just awareness, just the simple presence of being, and it's never been disturbed by anything that's happened within it. You are not the thoughts that pass through. You are not the voice that narrates your life. You are not the stories you tell yourself about who you are, what you should be, what went wrong, what might go wrong. All of that is content, and you are the context. You are the space in which thoughts arise, the silence in which words appear, the stillness in which all this movement happens, and that space has never been touched by anything. It's never been diminished by your mistakes. It's never been improved by your achievements. It's never been lost, though you've forgotten it countless times. It's what you've always been before you learned language, before you developed a personality, before you became someone with a story and an identity and a life that needs to be managed and controlled and figured out. Underneath all of that, prior to all of that, there's just this pure awareness, pure presence, pure consciousness, being conscious of itself. And it's not special. It's not mystical. It's the most ordinary thing in the world. It's what's here when everything else falls away. It's what's here even when nothing falls away. It's just here, always, closer than your breath, more intimate than your thoughts, more real than anything that appears within it. The overthinking, the constant mental noise, the voice that never stops it was never the problem. It was just a misunderstanding. You thought you were that voice, so of course you couldn't escape it. You were trying to use the voice to silence the voice, which is impossible. But now you're beginning to see you're not the voice. You're the silence that hears it. You're the awareness that knows it's happening. And from that recognition, the whole struggle dissolves. Not because the thinking stops forever, but because you're no longer trapped in it, no longer identified with it, no longer believing that you are it. Thoughts come and go like weather passing through the sky, and you remain unchanged, untouched, free. This is what Watts was pointing to all along. Not a technique, not a practice, not a state to achieve. Just the simple recognition of what you've always been, hidden in plain sight, closer than close, waiting for you to stop looking and simply see.